The evidence in the envelope. The envelope made a soft, frictionless sound as Daniel Hart slid it across the white linen tablecloth. The matte paper caught a glint from the votive candle between them, but otherwise made no impression. No thud, no weight. Just a quiet nudge across the table, inches from Laura's perfectly manicured fingers. Her smile faltered. For a moment, there was only the hum of conversation and the soft clink of cutlery around them. The river outside shimmered under the late spring dusk, and inside, the bistro's golden sconces warmed everything in a flattering glow. Laura's hand hovered, then touched the envelope lightly. She looked at Daniel, that well-practiced tilt of the head she used when navigating awkward donor calls or PTA meetings, concerned, composed, curious. Daniel didn't speak. He only watched her, thumb idly rubbing over the ridge of his wedding band, the gesture slow and unbroken. Across the table, Alan Finch sipped his wine with deliberate detachment, gaze drifting toward the window as if they weren't sitting in the middle of a private anniversary dinner for 30. Laura opened the envelope. She drew out the photograph with the same grace she used to unfold linen napkins or sign thank you notes. Her eyes moved from the image to Daniel, then back again. The first scream was not loud, it was jagged, a raw, involuntary exhale that caught mid-throat and made the diners at the nearest table look up, puzzled. The second scream shattered the room. Silverware froze mid-air. A server dropped a tray of sparkling water. Somewhere to their left, someone gasped, and the dull chirp of a phone unlocking followed an instant later. The photograph slipped from Laura's hand and fluttered onto the tablecloth, face up. A face stared back, young, unmistakable, and impossible. A child with Laura's eyes and Daniel's mouth. A child no one at the table was supposed to know existed. Laura stood suddenly, her chair scraping back with a screech. Her breath came in shuddering bursts. A hand clutched at her throat like she couldn't breathe. Her voice, when it returned, was cracked and shrill. What is this? Daniel, what are you doing? She grabbed the photo, crushed it in her fist, but not before at least 3 phones had caught it on camera. Daniel remained seated, hands folded loosely on the table. He didn't raise his voice. You know exactly what it is. A low murmur rippled through the room. The maitre d' appeared, all polished nerves and crisis training, murmuring something about privacy, about taking things outside. Laura ignored him. Her gaze flicked to Alan, then back to Daniel, frantic. You can't just... This isn't... She stopped herself, composed, tried again. Whatever this is, we are not doing it here. But they were already doing it here. The moment the envelope touched the table, it had begun. Alan stood slowly, buttoned his blazer with military precision. Might be wise to step outside, Laura, he said evenly, before this becomes more than a scene. Laura looked around. Phones were still raised. A woman in a red dress leaned into her husband, whispering. Someone else angled for a better shot. The bistro's ambiance had turned voyeuristic. The gold light no longer flattered it exposed. Daniel rose last. He took his time, straightened his cuffs. He didn't look at Laura again. He didn't need to. The servers were already whispering. One had picked up the discarded envelope and tucked it discreetly into a pocket. The maitre d' was on the phone, likely to the owner, possibly the police. The anniversary dinner was over. As Laura stumbled past him, one heel catching slightly on the rug, Daniel heard her mutter something under her breath, a fragment of a prayer or a curse. He couldn't tell. She pushed through the glass doors into the night air, Alan trailing just behind her, phone already out, fingers moving fast. Daniel remained for a moment. The candle flickered. He reached down and righted her wine glass, which had tipped in the commotion. The stem wobbled slightly before settling. His hand was steady. A boy at the next table whispered to his mother, "Is she okay?" The mother didn't answer. She was staring at Daniel. He caught her gaze, nodded once polite, not apologetic, and turned to leave. Outside, the river whispered against the pilings. The wind carried the faint scent of lavender from the restaurant's planters. Across the street, someone was already uploading a video. He could see the thumbnail, Laura's pale face, mouth open in shock, one hand raised as if to block the camera. The caption was already populating "Woman Screams" at anniversary dinner over photo bombshell. He watched for a moment longer, then walked to the corner and turned without looking back. But this moment, This reckoning had been born 2 decades earlier, in a house where silence had been mistaken for grace and grief for virtue, where a woman named Ruth Hayes had left behind a sealed folder with her will, and Daniel Hart had let it sit untouched for nearly a year before opening it. It started not with a scream, but with a letter, a single sheet of paper, folded once, yellowed at the edges. Her handwriting was unmistakable sharp, impatient, unadorned. He'd opened it in the garage, sitting on the workbench, the same place he kept his oil-stained rag and socket wrenches lined up by size. The garage was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you hear your own breath. He hadn't expected much. Ruth had never been sentimental, but the letter wasn't sentimental. It was a directive. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I've died and you've finally gotten around to cleaning out my things. Good. You were always slow with the hard jobs. I've left you something. It's not an apology. It's proof. You'll know what to do. There was no signature, no date. Just a small brass key taped to the bottom corner. Daniel had stared at the key for a long time. Then he'd gone inside and opened the top drawer of the old roll-top desk Ruth had kept locked for years. Inside was a file folder, thin. A name typed on the tab, not his, not Laura's. He opened it, read the first page, and something in his chest shifted. Not a break, not yet, but a lean in a direction that would not let him go back. He didn't speak of it for days, not to Laura, not to anyone. But each morning after, he'd wake before the alarm, go to the garage, and sit at the workbench with the folder in his lap, reading, rereading, cross-checking dates, names, hospital records, donation ledgers, small things, quiet things. The envelope at the restaurant had been the first loud thing, and it was only the beginning. The folder still sat on the workbench, angled slightly where Daniel had pushed it aside to make room for his coffee cup. The edge of the manila cover had curled from handling, and one of the brass fasteners inside had started to pull free. He hadn't fixed it. There was something in the damage that felt appropriate-like. The contents had made the paper itself recoil. Tonight, the house was still. Upstairs, Laura had gone to bed after her usual routine face cream, chamomile tea, a brief scroll through social media, screen tilted away from him. She hadn't noticed the absence of his wedding ring on the nightstand. Or if she had, she hadn't asked. Daniel sat in the study, not the garage this time. The old banker's lamp cast a green glow across the desk, pooling over the folder. The room smelled faintly of old paper and lemon oil. He hadn't turned on any music. He didn't want accompaniment. He opened the folder again, slower than before. The first page was the same birth record he'd stared at for a week straight. It wasn't the one he remembered. Not the one they'd been shown in the hospital, where the word stillbirth had been written in somber black ink across a form that bore Laura's name. That document had been tucked away in their safe, untouched for years. But this was different. This page listed a birth date that matched their son. But the name in the field marked Mother was not Laura Hart. It was a name Daniel didn't recognize, Angela Sandor, age 19, unmarried. The hospital was the same. St. Laura's Private Medical, the same one where Laura had delivered. But the doctor's signature was different, and in the field marked disposition of infant, there was no mention of stillbirth. Instead, it read, released to custody, private adoption, sealed. His thumb pressed unconsciously against the absence of the ring on his finger. Beneath the birth page was a series of photocopied forms, some hospital intake sheets, a donor ledger from the St. Laura's Foundation, and a typewritten note in Ruth's clipped style. Daniel, this isn't about grief. It's about the difference between what happened and what you were told happened. Your son was born alive. I couldn't say it then. Laura made sure of that. There was no elaboration, just a paperclip holding the note to a photocopy of a donation record. Ruth had underlined one entry in blue ink. Larson Family Trust, newborn wing renovation, $250,000. The date was 3 weeks after the birth. Daniel stared at it until the numbers swam. He stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back on the worn rug, and walked to the window. The backyard was pitch black, the porch light long since switched off. He could see his own reflection in the glass shoulders, hunched, jaw slack. He looked smaller than he remembered. The file sat open behind him like a wound. He remembered the funeral, or rather, the absence of it. Laura had insisted they handle it privately. I don't want the pity, she'd said, her voice tightly composed. They'd buried ashes, though there had never been a cremation certificate. He hadn't questioned it. Grief made you pliable, or maybe just cowardly. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass. When he returned to the desk, he sat down slowly and turned to the next page. It was a scanned memo hospital stationery, dated the day after the birth. It referenced patient A. Sandor and noted a transfer of custody to pre-approved private guardians under sealed court order. No names, no judge listed, just initials at the bottom, L.H. Laura Hart. He stared at the letters, nausea coiling low in his stomach, his hands clenched reflexively, knuckles whitening. Ruth had known. For how long, he wasn't sure, but long enough to gather these pages, to stash them away for a moment like this. She hadn't confronted him. That wasn't her style. She'd left breadcrumbs. Ruth always believed people had to walk themselves to the fire. Daniel closed the folder, resting his hand on top of it. The pulse in his wrist was sharp, fast. He reached instinctively for his coffee, found it cold, and drank it anyway. He remembered the way Laura had cried in the hospital, how she'd refused visitors, kept the blinds drawn. He remembered the nurse who'd tried to say something in the hallway, only for Laura to cut her off with a look that could freeze air. He'd been too wrecked to notice what he wasn't being told. The sound of the refrigerator's motor humming on in the kitchen felt suddenly too loud. He opened the folder again, more methodically this time, and removed the final item, a single photograph. It was grainy, a photocopy, but clear enough. A woman, young, pale, lying in a hospital bed. Her hair was matted, her expression dazed. In her arms, a bundled newborn. The woman was not Laura. He had never seen that face before, and yet something about the curve of the infant's cheek, the line of the jaw, it was like a punch to the chest. His son. Not stillborn, alive, held by a stranger. He sat very still. The photograph slid slightly as his breath stirred the paper. He didn't cry, not then. That had already been burned out of him years ago. Instead, a kind of quiet settled over him. Not peace, not clarity. Just an absence of noise, a narrowing. He reached for a yellow notepad and began to write. He listed names, dates, cross-referenced the donation ledger with Laura's calendar from that year, noted inconsistencies, circled the initials, drew lines between pages. It wasn't neat, not his usual style, but it was thorough. At the bottom of the page, he wrote one word and underlined it twice. Why? Then, after a pause, he added another. How? He leaned back in the chair, letting the questions hang. It would have been easier to pretend the folder didn't exist. To say Ruth had been mistaken, that some records had been misfiled, but the photograph was real. The handwriting was hers. The names and dates matched too precisely. And Laura had never looked him in the eye when she'd told the story. Not really. She'd looked past him, over him, through him. Daniel placed the photograph back into the folder and closed it. He turned off the desk lamp. In the dark, he stood for a long time, the folder under one arm, his other hand pressing against the center of his chest, as if to still whatever had started moving there. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the garage again, the folder on his lap, the smell of old oil rising around him. He stared at the tools on the pegboard, each one hung precisely, each one used for a purpose. He thought of Ruth, blunt and unsentimental, who had once said to him at a cookout, "Don't confuse silence with grace. Sometimes it's just cowardice dressed up in manners." He hadn't understood her then. He did now. And something in him, quiet, methodical, long dormant, began to wake. The garage door groaned as it lifted, letting in the flat gray light of early morning. Daniel didn't flinch. He was already seated at the workbench, the yellow notepad beside him, the folder open once more. The air smelled of dust and faint gasoline. He'd been waiting. Alan Finch stepped under the threshold and paused, eyes adjusting to the dim. He wore his usual uniform, steel-rimmed glasses, flannel shirt, khakis with a phone bulge at the hip. Practical, unhurried, sharp. "You look like hell," Alan said, brushing his hands off on his thighs. "Been up all night?" Daniel nodded once. "Thanks for coming." Alan surveyed the garage. Still the most organized chaos I've ever seen. "You hang your tools by size or by function?" "Both," Daniel murmured. Depends on the wall. Alan raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He stepped closer, gaze landing on the folder. So, he said, voice low, you want me to look into something, off the record. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slid the photograph across the bench. The baby, the wristband, the date. Alan took it in with a slow exhale, then picked up the matching page from Ruth's notes. I need to know where he went, Daniel said. His voice was steady, but there was something behind it, like a wire stretched too tight. I need to know what happened between the hospital and the story I was told. Alan's eyes narrowed, not unkindly. You think she lied? I know she lied. Alan looked at the papers again. And you want what? Confirmation or firepower? Both, Daniel said. But I want it done clean. No illegal access, no risk to you. Alan huffed. That's good because I'm not going to jail for your marriage. Daniel didn't smile. Fair. Alan pulled a small notebook from his back pocket and flipped it open. Okay, start from the top. What do you have that's not just grief and suspicion? Daniel recited it all, the donation ledger from the foundation Laura had chaired that year, the curious withdrawal made in mid-August, the travel receipts for a weekend trip she'd claimed was a conference in Denver. He showed Alan a printout of her public calendar from that year, scrubbed from the nonprofit site, but recoverable via a cached archive. Alan nodded as he listened, jotting shorthand notes. And this ledger, how'd you get it? She kept it in a home file, Daniel said. I made a copy. She doesn't know. Alan gave a low whistle. That's bold. It was Ruth's handwriting on the hospital log. She wouldn't have forged that. She left it for a reason. Alan closed his notebook with a snap. All right, I'll dig. Legally. FOIA requests, public records, archived web content. I'm not touching anything behind a locked server. No wiretaps, no hacking. Daniel nodded. That's all I ask? As Alan left, Daniel sat for a long time, staring at the pegboard, the hammer, the square, the level. He thought of the way Ruth used to talk when the kids weren't around. No euphemisms, no softening. Just the facts, Daniel, just the damn facts. The next 3 days passed in a careful rhythm. Daniel went to work, answered emails, made dinner when Laura was out. He said little. He slept less. Every night he returned to the garage, reviewing the notes, rereading the dates, rechecking the names. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for cracks. On the fourth evening, just after 9, his phone buzzed. Alan. Got something, he said without preamble, and you're not going to like it. Daniel stepped out into the driveway, away from the kitchen window. Tell me. I ran a FOIA request on birth records from that week in Colorado. Took some digging. There's a clinic at St. Laura's private medical small, private board, not under the main hospital network. Found a cache staff directory from 20 years ago. Guess who was on the donor list from that same week? Daniel's breath caught. Laura. Bingo. A donation made in her maiden name, $5,000, labeled as equipment assistance. Daniel closed his eyes. She bought them off. Looks that way. That ledger entry you showed me matches the foundation's withdrawal to the cent. Timing's perfect. Daniel said nothing. Alan continued. There's more. The clinic had a policy now, defunct where, under certain privacy hardship clauses, births could be recorded under pseudonyms. I found a cached document buried in a web archive listing live births from that week. One of them matches the date, the weight, the time Ruth recorded. No mother listed, but the attending nurse? Same name from Ruth's handwriting, same signature style. Daniel's stomach turned. So he was born alive, transferred, hidden. Alan's voice dropped. It's not just a maybe anymore. This is your confirmation. Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. Listen, Alan said. I've stayed within the law, but you're walking into deep water now. If you go public, you're detonating lives. You sure you want to keep going? Daniel looked up at the dark sky. The stars were faint, scattered like chalk dust. He thought of the baby's face in the photo, the curve of the cheek, the line of the jaw. His son. I'm sure, he said quietly. Later that night, the garage light buzzed overhead as Daniel sat alone. The folder lay open in front of him, Alan's printed documents beside Ruth's notes, the photograph between them. He stared at it all, at the paper trail of betrayal, at the precision with which it had been constructed, at the years of silence layered over a lie. He reached for his wedding ring and ran his thumb over it. Once, twice, a habit, a reflex. Then he stopped. Daniel sat alone in the garage. The hum of the fluorescent bulb above him was the only sound. He stared at the cached birth record. That line, infant transferred to private care, per maternal request. Old self-trusting, careful, restrained, died when he read those words. No more waiting, no more pretending she had reasons he could forgive. Only one question now, not if she paid, but how publicly. Something inside broke, but broken things make sharp edges. He opened his laptop, created a new folder, began scanning every page, cross-referencing names, building a timeline. He labeled each file with a date, a source, a connection. Precision mattered, timing mattered. Above the garage, the house was still. He kept working. The husband who had once believed in her grief, who had sat beside her in quiet vigils, who had swallowed his doubts for the sake of peace, that man was gone. What remained was colder, sharper, certain. By 2 a.m, the flight was booked, Colorado Springs. Departing Sunday. One carry-on, no return yet scheduled. Daniel closed the laptop and leaned back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. It had begun. The tires hissed over the wet pavement as Daniel turned off the main road into a quiet neighborhood just outside Colorado Springs. The houses here were modest, well-kept, with tidy shrubs and bikes leaning against porch rails. It was the kind of place where kids played in driveways and neighbors waved from lawn chairs. He parked half a block down, engine idling for a moment before he shut it off. The silence inside the car felt thick. He checked the photograph again, the one from the file, the one Ruth had left buried under 2 decades of curated grief. The timestamp in the metadata matched a clinic record from the same week. Ruth had added a note in the margin, twins, adopted privately, start here. Now he waited, watching the house. It was a single-story ranch with pale blue siding and a wide front window. A red tricycle lay tipped on the lawn, and a wind chime tinkled from the porch. At just after 3 p.m, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. A man in his early 40s got out first. Tall, weathered, the stance of someone who repaired his own fence posts. Mark Mason. He opened the back door and reached for a grocery bag. A moment later, a woman stepped out on the passenger side. Elise, slight brown hair pulled back, cardigan sleeves pushed to her elbows. The twins emerged last. Teenagers now. Callie moved first long limbs, dark hoodie, earbuds in. Callum followed more slowly, shoulders broad, gaze scanning the sidewalk like he was cataloging who might be watching. Neither looked toward Daniel's car. He didn't get out. Not yet. He waited until they'd gone inside, the screen door clapping behind them, before he started the car and pulled away. The meeting wasn't going to happen on their turf. That would be too much too fast. He needed neutral ground, something casual, a place where no one would feel ambushed. He scrolled through his phone and tapped out a message to the email address Elise had used in the adoption documents. A guess, but Ruth had taught him to trust what people reuse. Within the hour, he had a reply. The coffee shop at the regional airport. Sunday afternoon. She'd bring the kids. Mark might come, might not. When Daniel walked into the cafe 2 days later, the smell of scorched espresso and cleaning chemicals hit him first. It was bright, sterile, the kind of place where no one lingered long. A few travelers sat hunched over laptops, and a family with carry-ons juggled juice boxes near the window. Elise was already seated near the back with Callie and Callum. They looked up as he approached. Elise stood to shake his hand. Her grip was firm, her smile polite but strained. Daniel, thank you for meeting me. Callie gave him a cautious nod, one earbud still in. Callum tilted his chin up in greeting, then looked down at his phone. Daniel didn't blame them. He wasn't here to make them comfortable. He sat folding his hands on the table. I'm not here to disrupt anything. I just needed to see them, to know they're real, that they're okay. They are, Elise said gently, with a quick glance at the twins. We've done our best. They're good kids. Callie's eyes flicked to her mother, then to Daniel. You're the one who knew Ruth? He nodded. I was her son-in-law. Callum looked up. So you're, what, our birth mom's husband? Yes. He hesitated. I didn't know, not until recently. I thought we lost the baby. There was a long pause. The hum of the espresso machine filled the space. Elise reached for her coffee, then set it down without drinking. We didn't know the full story either. We were told she couldn't keep the child, that it was a closed adoption. We didn't push. We thought it was what she wanted. I believe you, Daniel said, and he did. Their faces didn't carry the brittle calculation he'd come to recognize in Laura's. These people had built a life on a half-truth, not knowing it had been engineered. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small point-and-shoot camera. Not a phone, not a stage selfie, something quiet. Would it be all right if I took a photo? Just one. Nothing posed, just proof that you're here, that you're okay. Elise looked at the twins. Callie shrugged. Callum gave a small nod. Sure, just don't tag us or anything. I won't. They didn't smile, but they didn't move away either. He lifted the camera, took one shot, and lowered it. No click, no flash. Just the quiet capture of two young people sitting across from him, aware and uncertain. The timestamp embedded in the metadata would be the quiet nail in the coffin of Laura's narrative. Elise leaned in slightly. Daniel, can I talk to you for a moment? He followed her to the counter, where a stack of napkins and sugar packets offered a veneer of privacy. She lowered her voice. Please, I know you're angry. I would be too, but they've had a stable life. They've never wanted for love. If this goes public, if you make it about Laura, it'll follow them. School, college, jobs. It won't just hit her. I know, he said quietly. Then why not stop here? You've seen them. You've got your photo. Why not let it rest? Daniel looked past her, at the twins. Callum had taken out his phone again. Callie was sketching something on a napkin, head tilted, eyes flicking between the lines. Ordinary, alive, not some symbol in a decades-old lie. I can't, he said. Not yet. Elise's shoulders sagged. She didn't argue further. As they left, Callie gave him a quick glance. You're not what I pictured, she said. Daniel smiled faintly. Neither are you. Outside, the wind had picked up, and dry leaves skittered across the pavement. His phone buzzed as he reached his rental car. Alan. You're on thin ice, Alan said without preamble. You took a photo? Yes. Did you ask permission? They agreed. Good. Keep a record of that. But Daniel, this is the part where you decide if you're lighting a fire or holding a candle. Daniel looked out at the parking lot. Elise and the twins were getting into their car. The door slammed, muffling their voices. I'm not here to burn them, he said. Only the lie. Alan was quiet for a moment. Then be surgical, because if this turns into a bonfire, they're standing right next to the kindling. Daniel ended the call without replying. He sat in the car for a long moment, the camera in his lap. The photo was already backed up, time-stamped, metadata intact. The twins were real, alive, loved, but they were not hers to give away. The next step would be harder. He started the car. The wheels rolled over the scattered leaves, and he pulled back onto the road. The restaurant's glass front glowed amber against the dusk, the kind of place where every table had a story, and the waitstaff moved like stagehands in a well-rehearsed play. Daniel arrived early. He asked for a window seat and handed the hostess a folded bill, not large, just enough to ensure she remembered his request and not his face. The maitre d' nodded with the faint smile of someone who recognized discretion. He'd chosen this night carefully. The anniversary dinner was an annual event, a benefit in Laura's honor for the Pediatric Grief Foundation she'd helped launch. The guest list was curated, the wine list exquisite, and the lighting soft enough to flatter every angle. She would be in her element, surrounded by donors, community leaders, the kind of people who shared her language of public empathy and private preservation. He took his seat just before 6, facing the entrance. The envelope was tucked inside his blazer, matte black, unadorned. He'd run his thumb across its edge 3 times since leaving the car. He didn't order right away. He waited. Laura arrived just after 6:15, wearing a navy sheath dress and a smile that had been perfected over 2 decades. She moved through the room like a current, touching shoulders, leaning in to laugh. She kissed Daniel on the cheek when she reached him, as if nothing about their marriage had unraveled, as if this night were just another photo op. You look tired, she said lightly as she sat. Try smiling before the cameras come out. Daniel sipped his water. I'm saving it for the right moment. She didn't catch the edge in his voice, or pretended not to. The waiter came. She ordered for both of them. She always had. He let her. Across the room, Alan Finch sat alone at the bar, nursing a club soda. He wore a charcoal blazer and a look that said he was just another bored guest waiting for someone late. His briefcase rested at his feet. No one noticed him. That was the point. The first course arrived, scallops in a blood orange reduction, and Laura launched into a recap of the Foundation's latest figures. We've doubled our reach this quarter. The new bereavement kits are going out to 3 new hospitals. And the family stories we're collecting, they're so powerful. Raw, but curated. People respond to honesty when it's shaped right. Daniel nodded, letting her talk. Her hands moved as she spoke, elegant and precise. She was always careful about her hands. The ring still gleamed on her finger, a detail she insisted on, even after things had soured. By the time the duck confit arrived, he could see the wine had begun to relax her posture. She leaned in more. Her voice dropped into that confiding register she used with donors and old friends. "You've been quiet," she said, brushing a crumb from the edge of her plate. "You know, I do appreciate you coming tonight. It means something." Daniel reached into his blazer and placed the envelope on the table between them. She blinked. "What's this?" "Something that also means something." She picked it up slowly, her smile dimming, but still intact. Her fingers traced the flap. "Daniel, if this is about, open it." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was full but not loud. Conversations murmured around them like gentle surf. A server passed by with a tray of wine glasses. Someone laughed near the bar. Laura opened the envelope and tilted it. A single photograph slid out. It landed face up on the linen tablecloth. 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, standing in front of a gate at Denver International. The boy was holding a small duffel. The girl wore a hoodie with paint smudges on the sleeve. Their expressions were natural, unaware. The timestamp in the corner was clear. Laura stared at it for a long moment. Her fingers froze on the edge. Daniel watched her face. He saw the moment the smile cracked. The moment calculation began. Her voice was barely audible. "How long have you known?" He didn't blink. "Since the 3rd of October. Ruth's file had an old hospital ledger admission codes from St. Laura's. Alan traced the patient ID to a private room paid through an anonymized donor account. We matched the birth date, then the travel records, then the names. Your foundation's archive still had cash donor logs from the early 2000s. You didn't sanitize them thoroughly. One of the pediatric grief kits was logged to a family in Boulder, Elise Mason. Adopted twins, born premature. The timing matched, the naming pattern matched. And then there was the hospital billing separate line item for neonatal legal liaison. That was the clincher. Laura's face had gone pale. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You had no right, he said, louder now. Heads turned. Across the room, someone lowered their fork. "You told me they died," he said. "You let me bury them in my head for 20 years. You stood next to me at memorial fundraisers and let me speak. You let strangers hand us sympathy and checks while you hid the fact that they were alive, that you gave them away." Her chair scraped slightly as she leaned in. "Daniel, we are in public." "I know." He stood, quietly, calmly. "They're alive," he said to the room. The dining room stilled. "My children," he said, voice clear now. "The twins we were told died in the hospital. Laura gave them up, without my knowledge, without my consent. And for 20 years, she has built a reputation on curated grief, on stories of loss, on lies." A woman at a nearby table gasped. Someone dropped a fork. A man near the entrance took out his phone. Laura stood too, her voice tight. "This is not the place." "No," he said. "This is exactly the place. You built your image here. You raised money on stories here. You made me a prop in your grief. You told the world about your loss, but you never once told the truth." The maitre d' approached, hesitant. "Sir, perhaps we could—" Alan was already moving. He handed a slim folder to the maitre d'. "You'll want to hold on to this. It contains documentation relevant to a developing legal matter. You are now a witness." The maitre d' paled. Laura reached for Daniel's arm. "You're destroying everything. Think of what this will do." "I did think." People were filming now, phones up, faces half shocked, half hungry. He turned back to her. "Every story you told was a sedative. Every donor dinner, every article, every tear was a way to keep the truth buried. You didn't just lie to me. You lied to every parent who grieved beside us. And now they'll know. Alan stepped beside him. Footage is already online, tagging local media, hashtags active. Laura's lips parted, but nothing came. Daniel looked down at the photos still lying on the table. They're good kids, smart, kind. And they have no idea what you did. Her voice cracked. You'll ruin them. No, he said. You did that. The moment you decided their lives were a better secret than a shared truth. He turned and walked away. Behind him, the room erupted. Voices layered over each other. Chairs scraped. The servers retreated toward the kitchen. Someone shouted something about lawyers. Glass broke. Alan followed him out, the door swinging shut behind them. Outside, the cold air hit like a slap. Daniel exhaled. Alan glanced at him. You sure you're ready for what comes next? No, Daniel said, but it's coming anyway. Down the street, a teenager was already scrolling through a video of the scene, pausing and replaying Daniel's words. The truth was out, and it wasn't going back in. The first subpoena was filed less than 48 hours later. Alan had warned him it would be faster than Daniel could emotionally catch up. The footage from the dinner had gone viral by morning, clipped and subtitled, paired with screenshots of Laura's foundation speeches and a side-by-side of the old Monroe Foundation homepage, with her glowing bio next to the scrubbed version that appeared by midday. Daniel sat in Alan's office while the printer hummed steadily behind him. Legal counsel, a thin woman named Margot, with a voice like crushed ice, reviewed the draft language for the third subpoena, this one aimed at a private charter service that had flown Laura to Reno 6 years ago under her maiden name. The paper trail was already thick with contradictions. Alan passed Daniel a mug of coffee, black. The board's in emergency session. Some of them are panicking. One donor threatened to freeze $1 million endowment unless they show proof of internal review. Daniel nodded slowly. Do they know yet? They know enough to be afraid. Alan tapped a folder on the table. Bank transfers under the foundation name to a private account. Travel receipts that don't match public speaking engagements. And the fact that the kids exist. That's the center. Everything else orbits that. Daniel stared at the mug. She said she did it to protect them. Alan didn't answer. He let the silence settle like dust. Outside, traffic rolled by in the wet hush of a Colorado morning. Daniel felt it in his chest, a slow, grinding ache that wasn't quite regret, but wasn't triumph either. The next morning, Daniel filed the separation papers. He went alone, early, before the office filled. The clerk behind the glass didn't recognize him, or if she did, she said nothing. The forms were signed with a pen that skipped slightly on the cheap paper. It felt mechanical, procedural, like renewing a license. But as he slipped the final document into the envelope and handed it across, something in him hollowed out. The condo was smaller than their old place, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a view of a brick wall and a sliver of sky. The kitchen had a faint smell of new paint and forgotten spices. He unpacked slowly, methodically. Books first, then the toolbox, then the kettle. He left the wedding ring on the bathroom counter for 3 days before moving it to the back of a drawer. Emails began to arrive from people he hadn't heard from in years. Some were cautious. Saw the clip. Hope you're okay. Others were blunt. What the hell happened? A few were angry. One donor accused him of torpedoing a good woman's life for pride. Daniel read each one once, then archived it. The Monroe Foundation issued a public statement by the end of the week. It was vague, allegations under review, commitment to transparency, privacy of all involved. But the damage was already viral. Screenshots of Laura's past interviews circulated with red circles and question marks. A Reddit thread had dissected her timeline down to the hour. Someone found a cached version of a donor newsletter from 5 years ago, where she described a mother's loss, with details that now read like fiction. Daniel watched it all from the couch, laptop on his knees, the soft clink of rain against the windows like background percussion. He felt detached, like he was observing someone else's life collapse. Laura, for her part, went quiet. Her social calendar emptied overnight. Speaking engagements were postponed. The foundation gala was canceled. A photo surfaced of her leaving a board meeting, sunglasses on, jaw tight, flanked by 2 people he didn't recognize. Her posture had that same brittle elegance, but something in her shoulders had folded inward. Alan called late one evening. The adoption agency lawyered up. They're claiming sealed records protect them from exposure, but the FOIA request on the nonprofit finances is valid. We'll get more. Daniel rubbed his eyes. And the kids? They're not in the press yet. That part's holding, but it won't last forever. Daniel sat back. The ceiling above him was smooth and white and blank. They don't deserve this. No, Alan said, but they deserve the truth, and you didn't put them in this story. She did. There was a pause. You okay? Alan asked. No, Daniel said. But I'm not drowning anymore. He hung up and sat in the quiet. The condo was still unfamiliar, like a hotel you stayed in long enough to forget your real address. The air smelled faintly of wood glue and lemon cleaner. The only photo he'd unpacked stood on the windowsill. Ruth, in a windbreaker, laughing mid-sentence, her hair blown sideways by the wind. He remembered what she'd said, the last time they spoke in person. You don't need to torch the house. Just pull the fire alarm and let people smell the smoke. He'd done more than that. He'd opened every window and waited for the wind to carry the truth. The cost was still settling. His name would never be clean again, not in the circles they used to move in, not among the donors or the polished people who smiled with their teeth and whispered behind their hands. He would be the man who ruined a woman's reputation, the man who made grief political, the man who weaponized a secret. But he could breathe, and for the first time in years, he didn't flinch when he looked in the mirror. The quiet legal siege was underway. Not dramatic, not loud, but relentless. And it was only just beginning. A soft knock pulled Daniel from his thoughts. He rose, brushing a thumb over the edge of his wedding ring. Still on, though he no longer wore it in public, and opened the door. Callie stood there, her hair pulled into a loose braid, a canvas tote slung over one shoulder. Callum was behind her, hands in his jacket pockets, a paper bag tucked under one arm. Neither of them smiled immediately, but their eyes didn't hold the guarded distance they had in the weeks after the reveal. They looked present. Hey, Daniel said quietly. Hi, Callie replied. We brought muffins and a card. Daniel stepped aside, motioning them in. You didn't have to bring anything. Callum shrugged. Elise made us promise not to come empty-handed. The condo smelled faintly of coffee and the faint citrus of wood cleaner. Still sparse bare walls, a half-assembled bookshelf by the window, but warmer now. A blue ceramic mug sat drying by the sink. The light from the east-facing windows made the room feel less temporary. Daniel gestured toward the small round table near the kitchenette. Have a seat. Coffee's fresh, if you want some. They settled in quietly. Callie placed the bag in the center of the table and withdrew a folded note card, hand-drawn with a sketch of a pine cone and the words, "For later," in careful cursive. She slid it across to him. It's not dramatic, she said. Just thoughts, stuff we weren't sure how to say. Daniel nodded, his throat catching slightly. He didn't open it. I'll read it later, he said. Callum leaned back, scanning the room. Looks like you're still settling in. I am, Daniel said. Feels like I moved in yesterday, though it's been, a month? 5 weeks, Callie said. We counted. Daniel smiled faintly and moved to pour coffee. He offered them each a mug, then sat, wrapping his hands around his own cup, the heat grounding him. The silence stretched, not tense, just tentative. Then Callie spoke. Do you still have the photo? He didn't pretend not to know which one she meant. He rose, opened the middle drawer by the sink, and pulled out the matte envelope. Inside, the photograph. Grainy but clear, Ruth's handwriting on the back in blue ink, Denver Airport, July 2005. Laura, holding a bundled infant, boarding a plane alone. He slid it across to them. Callum took it first, turning it in his hands. She said she was at a grief retreat that summer, some kind of wellness thing. Callie leaned in, examining the angle, the departure gate sign barely visible in the background. This was 2 months after Ruth died. She kept it all hidden, Daniel said quietly. Even from herself, maybe. Callum looked up. You're not trying to replace anyone, are you? No, Daniel said. No, I'm not. Callie's gaze was steady. Because we don't want a replacement. We don't want a second dad, or a new one, or a better one. We just want the truth. And maybe room to figure out what it means. Daniel nodded. That's all I want too. He stood, walked to a small wooden box on the counter, and opened it. Inside, a baby rattle silver, slightly tarnished, engraved with a name that had never made it into any family album. He held it for a moment, then placed it gently into the drawer beside the envelope and closed it. "I don't need to put it on a shelf," he said, "but I don't want to throw it away." Callie's voice was soft. "That makes sense?" Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on damp pavement. The world was still turning. Callum broke the pause. "So, Elise said you used to play guitar?" Daniel looked up, surprised. "A little, mostly for Ruth. I haven't touched it in years." Callum glanced at his sister. "We're in a band, kind of." "Not really," Callie corrected. "We just mess around. But Callum's decent on drums. I sketch cover art." Daniel's smile grew, small but real. "I'd like to hear you sometime." "Maybe," Callum said, then added, "if you promise not to make it weird." "I'll do my best." They sat for a while longer, the conversation meandering favorite albums, the weirdest thing they'd ever eaten, a shared dislike of early morning anything. It felt almost normal, like visiting distant family you were just starting to understand. Eventually, Callie rose, brushing crumbs from her lap. "We should go. Mark's waiting." Daniel walked them to the door. Callum paused on the threshold. "You're not the guy they say you are online," he said. Daniel looked at him. "Neither are you." Callum considered that. "Fair." Callie touched Daniel's arm lightly. "We're not promising anything. We're not shutting the door either." Daniel swallowed. "That's more than I hoped for." After they left, he stood in the doorway a long moment, listening to the retreating engine. Then he walked back inside, sat at the table, and opened the card. Inside, a sketch of a house with two windows open, smoke rising from one chimney. Below, in Callie's handwriting, "You didn't torch the house, but we smelled the smoke. We're still deciding whether to come inside." There was no signature. He placed the card gently on the table beside his coffee and let the silence settle around it. Later, he opened his laptop. Emails blinked an inquiry from a local paper, a donor retracting a pledge, a legal update from Alan. The world was still adjusting to the truth. He didn't reply to any of them. Instead, he opened a blank document, typed one line. Ruth Hayes believed in fire alarms. Then he sat back, thumb brushing once over the place his wedding ring used to be. He didn't flinch, not this time.